All right, three, let's see, Angle podcast. Let's see, let's take three. Hopefully the last one. Thanks for joining me, Mac Engel, Fort Worth Star Telegram, Angle podcast. Great guest for today's episode. He will be playing golf at an event coming up at Las Colinas Country Club in Irving, Texas, April 19th to the 21st. But he is not a golfer per se. Probably know this guy more for what he did on the baseball field than a golf course. But he is playing in a PGA Tour event. This is a PGA Champions event that does like kind of a hybrid event with celebrities. So this is the 2024 Invited Celebrity Classic. I was not invited. I did not make the cut. You can use that. This is the 2024 Invited Celebrity Classic. So it's a 3-day event, and PGA Tour Champions members, usually those are guys who are really good players on the PGA Tour, but now have sort of graduated, means they're older than 50, to the older tour, including John Daly. He'll be there. But really this event for fans is mostly a chance to watch guys and females too, who are great golfers and, great athletes in other sports and who are pretty good at golf too. Talking about former baseball pitcher Greg Maddux, former Dallas Cowboys DeMarcus Ware, Emmitt Smith, Tony Romo, who is actually a hell of a golfer. Tony Romo probably could have been a professional golfer had he chosen to pursue golf rather than, say, I don't know, football. I think he might have had a shot at it. Yeah, he is a really good golfer. In fact, he's won this event. Also be out there, Annika Sorenstam, a terrific pro when she was on the LPGA Tour, John Daly as well, and a whole bunch of other names you'll recognize, including my guest, a guy who was actually a hell of an athlete when he was a little bit younger, probably still is a very good athlete now, but he made a name for himself with one of the best careers as a left-handed pitcher that we've seen in the last, 25 or 30 years. He was with the Atlanta Braves team and they had their great run. He eventually finished his career with the New York Mets, but really you probably know him as an Atlanta Brave. And you probably know him as one of the best pitchers in the modern era. He won 305 games in his big league career, and he was nice enough to talk to me today. Please welcome Mr. Tom Glavine. I really appreciate your time on this one. Thank you very much. Where are you these days?
I am in the panhandle of Florida, Santa Rosa Beach.
All right. So I want to start this off by saying to you something that I've always wanted to say, especially as I got older. I've met you and I interviewed you once years ago. This is back in spring training when you were in Florida with the Braves. And I was really young. I was really starting out, and I had seen you on television. I had watched your career for a while, and I was really intimidated. And you couldn't have been any nicer. And
well, that's good. I'm glad.
Yeah, not as glad as I was.
Yeah, I don't like hearing the other stories. So
I know your reputation with media members, especially back then, baseball writers were a different crew.
yeah,
I always want to thank you for that, especially as I got older. You didn't have to be as great as you were, especially as patient as you were. I probably kept you for too long, which hopefully I don't do that here today. So thank you very much for
you're
always
welcome.
for being so kind and patient with your time then and certainly in the future, because I know with people like me, anybody who ever said anything about Tom Glavine was, man, the guy's great. He's great to talk to. So I really appreciate that time you gave me then. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing it. Thank you.
So one question, you're getting ready to play in a pro golf tournament here in Dallas-Fort Worth a week from this week, I guess a week from today. And one question I always like to ask of guys who play basketball, football, baseball, hockey, anything like that, when they play in these celebrity events is, are you nervous? You made a living at performing at the highest level in front of sometimes 50,000 fans. When they get hit a golf ball from a fan who might be 8, 10 feet away from you in a gallery, do you get nervous in those situations, Tom?
Yes, very much so.
Do you really?
And it's not so much that I'm afraid of hitting anybody or anything like that. It's just that it's the fear of embarrassment. I mean, I liken it to when I pitched. I always had a healthy, nervous energy the day of a game.
Mm.
And I think that had everything to do with me not wanting to go out there and fail or embarrass myself. Um, which as a pitcher, you're out there, it can happen. I always had that fear. Now, the reason I obviously overcame it was because I had a tremendously high trust factor of myself executing the things I was trying to do on the pitcher's mound. I don't have that same level of trust with a golf club in my hand. So that's where I think the fear creeps in, and the fear of failure, so to speak. So I think it has everything to do with that, and it's mostly, I would say it's mostly like short game stuff, scoring stuff around the green. The last thing you want to do is chunk a ball or skull a ball or stuff like that. And I think that's where it comes into play more than anything. So yeah, I get a little bit nervous in those things, but it is 100% just trust in what I'm trying to execute. If I have it, I'm fine. If I don't, then it's a different story.
Uh, so do you have any horror stories from playing with the gallery where you chunked one and you hit some poor guy who wasn't watching, or you flew the green by 100 yards, or maybe you hit into the next fairway?
I mean, I've done the skull a ball, chunk a ball, but I've only had one time really where I hit somebody, and that was, funny story, I guess, but small world, so to speak. It was a sports reporter that I hit. I was playing in the AT&T back in the early '90s, and back then I wasn't nearly as good as I am now. And in the real PGA events, those guys the fans are right on top of the
Right.
green.
Yep.
So I hit a shot. I think it was at Spyglass, and it wasn't that far. It was a little bit left of the green, not like terribly, but it hit this guy in the head. And I went over to him. I came up to the green. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry. Are you okay? Is there anything I can do?" That kind of thing. I offered him, I think, a ball or a glove or whatever. I had no idea who he was. And then lo and behold, the next day in the San Francisco Chronicle, the guy wrote like a hatchet piece on me. Um, like I hit him and I never apologized. I never said anything to him. And I'm like, you gotta, that couldn't be further from the truth. Like to the point where even I like my caddy and then my pro that I play with, the next day I was like, I did apologize to the guy, right? And they're like, yeah, you went over to him, you talked to him. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I want to make sure I wasn't imagining that. So it was a little ironic given, as you said earlier, my reputation of being pretty good with them.
Oh,
So that was a little bit different encounter.
well, and we wonder why sports journalists get their bad name that we've deserved. So John, before you came on with me, the PR person from the tournament sent me out a list of things about your career and some about your golf stuff. And there's an anecdote in here that I've never heard. And you can tell me if this is true or not, or what degree, how true it is, that you played a round of golf with your teammates, Greg Maddox and John Smoltz, with Tiger Woods. And Tiger said he lost money on the round. Is this true?
Well, in fairness to Tiger, I'm sure we were either playing our best ball, so 3 against 1,
Okay.
or some combination of the two of us, where Tiger was kind of wheeling the field, me against Greg, me against John, John against Greg.
Okay.
So it was not a straight up scenario by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, I mean, we were, when we moved to Orlando for spring training, we were fortunate to play with a lot of guys over there because there's a lot of guys that lived in that area. So, we'd play with Tiger a couple times a spring. We'd play with Lee Janzen a couple times a spring. Marco Mira. I mean, all those guys were down there. So, at any given time, it was always the worst day of spring training when you were pitching or you were pitching the next day, and Smoltzy would come in and say, "Hey, Tiger wants to play tomorrow," and be like, "Damn, I'm pitching. I can't play." So,
And all the times, how many rounds would you say you had a chance to hit with Tiger?
I want to say probably 4 or 5 rounds. Yeah.
Okay, so if I watched you do something, John, athletically, as just a random weekend warrior type, there's probably a dozen things that you could do in a given athletic event that I would say, oh my God, I can't believe he did it. Just because you're a pro athlete, you're a great hockey player. Is there anything Tiger did in those 4 or 5 rounds, any shot, anything that he did that made you say, "Oh my God, I cannot believe he just did that"?
Yes, two. So we were playing the first time we played with him. We were playing at Isleworth, his course, and we got to the eighth hole, and both Tiger and I hit our shots in the bunker on the green side bunker on the side of the green. And as we're getting out of the cart, I grabbed my sand wedge, I grabbed my putter, I'm walking, and Tiger was a little bit ahead of me, and I was like, "Hey, you forgot your putter." And he turned and he looked at me and he said, "Oh, I won't need it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So sure enough, he goes up, gets in the bunker, and hits the ball to about 2 inches from the hole, almost win. And I was like, "Okay, well, yeah, I guess you didn't need it." So we get to the 18th hole, kind of the same scenario. He's just off the green, walks up without his putter. So I jokingly said to him, I said, "I guess you don't need your putter again." He goes, "No." So same thing. He hit a little bump and run and hit it like 2 inches, 3 inches from the hole, knocks it in with his wedge or 7-iron, whatever he chipped with. And that was back in the time where he had done that Nike commercial where he was on the driving range and was bouncing the ball with his club and then hit it in midair. So he scoops the ball out of the hole with his club and proceeds to bounce it 4 times and then takes a full swing and hits the iron over the trees next to the 18th fairway or to the 18th green. And I just looked at him and I was like, "Damn." And then I went up, I was off the green too. I chipped my shot up really close, tapped it in, and then he grabbed my club, left-handed, pulls it out of the hole, doom, 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 left-handed, whack. And I'm like, "You gotta be kidding me."
Wow. Is that sort of like, I can't think of a better word, Tom. Is that kind of emasculating when he does something like that?
Well, I mean, I guess, to some extent, but listen, when you can do stuff like that, you show it off when you can.
Right.
And, why not? Like I said, it was impressive enough that he did it right-handed, but when he turned around and did it left-handed, it was just like, my God, this is stupid. Yeah.
Of all the
It was
courses,
a
you
lot of
played
fun to
golf for
play
a
with.
long time.
Have I?
Yeah, well, yeah, you've played it for a long time.
I did. I mean, I started playing a touch in high school.
Okay.
I'd play a couple times a summer, but didn't really start playing until probably I got to double A. I was in Greenville at the time with the Braves, and they had a really nice golf course there in Greenville, and they let us play. So I'd play off days, stuff like that. So I started playing a little bit more. And then once I got to the big leagues, that's when it really took off. And initially, before Smoltz got there, Rick Mailer
Yeah.
was there, and Rick loved to golf, so he would always set stuff up, and he'd always invite guys, and so I'd go out and play with him. And then when Smoltz got to the big leagues, we were all part of that group, and then John just kind of took over and ran with that whole thing. He was, I say it all the time, it's 100% true. He was the greatest golf concierge in the history of Major League Baseball. It was unbelievable
He
how
just
good
knew
he was.
everybody everywhere.
Oh my God! I mean, we'd get on a plane from Atlanta, and by the time you're starting to descend, you hear the wheels go down. He'd be like, "All right, 6:30 in the lobby. We're going to play Pine Valley." It's like, "Okay, I'll see you there." I mean, it was just awesome. He was unbelievable.
Tom, what's the favorite course you've ever played, and what is the course that is still on your bucket list?
It's hard. It's really hard. I don't know if I could pick a favorite. I would say for the longest time it was Augusta.
Yeah.
And Augusta probably was nip and tuck with Pine Valley. And that was before I got the chance to go over to Scotland a couple years ago and play St Andrews, play Carnoustie,
Wow.
played Kingsbarn. That's different. That's a different level of golf over there. When you start factoring in history and things that have happened and all of that stuff, it's I think that's what makes a place like Augusta so special. So it's hard to really say, oh man, if I had to pick one of these to play for the rest of my life, I certainly could pick one, but I'm not so sure. I wouldn't spend some time saying, wow, maybe I should have picked that other one. But given that Scotland will be hard to get back to and repeat that trip, I would say Augusta. I think the thing with Augusta is twofold. The first time I played there, I loved it, and it's the only place I've ever been where I was scared to death to take a divot on the driving range. Like I was like, it was so nice that I was like, if I take too big a divot, they're going to throw me out. But it wasn't until I went back the second time that as you're getting in there and you're not even on the golf course yet, you realize how immaculate the place is. I mean, there's not a blade of grass out of place. There's not a tree or a bush that's, untrimmed or pruned or what. I mean, it's just so pristine. And I don't think I really noticed that the first time I was there. I noticed the plushness of the golf course and everything and everything about it. But as far as the rest of the property was concerned, it was the second time that I went that I was like, oh my God, this place is like really unbelievably nice. So I'd go there anytime.
So there's a small detail to your career that I've forgotten about. And I think anybody over a certain age, when they hear the name Tom Glavine, wouldn't even remotely associate you with this sport. And if I read this right, you were drafted ahead of Brett Hull and Luc Robitaille in the 1984 NHL entry draft. Early in your baseball career, when maybe you're in single A or double A, maybe things aren't going great, and you got roughed up, did you ever have any second thoughts, Tom? You're like, yeah, maybe I should have played hockey.
Not second thought, so to speak, but there was a time when I signed and went to play rookie ball my first summer. Um, my arm hurt, my shoulder hurt, and I think it had everything to do with volume. And it was the first time that really I concentrated only on pitching. When I was in high school, I pitched, played center field, pitched again, played first base, pitched again. I never threw bullpens. I never did any of that. I never was on a every fifth day rotation. So, I wasn't conditioned to do it. And so when I got down there and started doing it, my shoulder started hurting and didn't feel great. And, it was the first time I'd ever experienced something like that. And initially, obviously right away, you're like, oh my God, something's wrong. I blew out my shoulder. And I remember at that time thinking, well, okay, at least it's early enough that if I can't pitch anymore, I can go back to school and I can play hockey, so because it was the summer that I graduated high school. But beyond that, no, I never second guessed my decision. That's not to say that I haven't and still do wonder what would have happened. I think early in my baseball career, it was even more so as I was climbing the ladder, and I still was not that far away from having hung up my skates, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I would go to a Bruins game and be like, man, I wonder what would have happened if I had played hockey. And I missed it. I jonesed for it a little bit. But not to the point where I was like, you know what, I shouldn't have done baseball. I should have gone and played hockey. I knew I made the right decision. It was just a matter of whether or not it was going to work out. And, obviously now it's easy not to second guess it because I don't think hockey could have possibly worked out any better than baseball did.
When you pitched, I followed your career because I was like a lot of Americans, I had Turner Broadcasting. And this is before the explosion of, local programming and local media rights deals for baseball teams. So I saw you pitch a lot. And the one detail about your career, having watched you as long as I did, I thought, man, if you have any shot against this guy, you had to get him in the first inning, not the second inning, the first inning. And that's just sort of an anecdotal thing that I had, having watched you for as long as I did. Was I right on that, Tom? Was your first inning, was that first inning a bugaboo for you?
I would say that there are plenty of numbers to back that up. Yes,
Really?
My first inning was my problem inning. I mean, I'm sure, if I went back now and looked at my career and looked at my first inning ERA compared to other, subsequent innings, my first inning ERA was most likely my highest ERA. Now, I say that with the caveat that, given the volume of first innings, right? I mean, that number could be skewed in the ninth inning or the eighth inning because I didn't have nearly the opportunities to pitch in those innings that I obviously did in the first inning. But, given the let's say the first six innings of the game, let's say that, or even the seventh inning, let's say the eighth and the ninth inning are outliers just because of the number of opportunities being so much less. My first inning was my worst inning.
What was it about that inning that Was it a mental thing or was it just an arm slot that
I
Irving
think it was
gave
a
you?
little bit of everything, quite
Really?
honestly. And it couldn't help but become a mental thing because, you're aware of it, right?
Yeah.
I knew of it, and I tried things. I would try warming up longer. I would try warming up less. I would try warming up, sitting down, getting back up, and trying to simulate that first inning a little bit in the bullpen, so that when I got out there, to trick my mind that, hey, this is the second inning. I mean, I tried everything, and it just like I said, it was just one of those things. And to me, if I had to point a finger at it or look at it, I think it's just simply because for me, with my style of pitching, I have to go out there and kind of ease my way into it, so to speak. I have to establish some things. And if I get out there on any given night, and right away my command's not great, or right away my changeup's not great, I don't have 95 miles an hour to say, okay, well, here, try and hit this. For me, I had to stay out of the middle of the plate. So, if I'm chunking 88 miles an hour up there, I'm not getting away with anything down the middle. So if I'm making mistakes down the middle, or making mistakes up, it's obviously going to get hit. If I didn't have great feel on my changeup, then it's obviously going to get hit early on until I find it. So I think it was more that than anything else. But thank God, generally speaking, when I had those bad first innings, more times than not, I was able to correct it and fix it and stay in there long enough to give myself a chance to win the game.
I asked your teammate, John Smoltz, about this regarding Greg Maddux, and it sort of pertains to you too, because you mentioned I didn't have 95. Well, everybody's throwing 95 today. Do you think, given the way you pitched and your strengths as a young kid coming out of high school, or even when you were in the minors, do you think you would have made it in today's game the way it's pitched?
I do, yes.
Yeah.
I know I don't mean to sound cocky, but listen, I think we're always trying to compare generations, right? And this generation to that generation, and I'm just a firm believer. If you were a great player in your generation, you would be a great player in any generation. You would figure it out,
Yep.
and I think that's what makes great players is they figure it out. It's not like every great player just stepped into the major leagues and had instant success and just went on their way to a Hall of Fame career. There were some bumps along the way. There were some, like we say all the time, everybody eats some humble pie in baseball at some point in time. So we've all had to do it. And we all figured something out. We all learned something from it. We all made adjustments. And I think that's what great players do. And I look at my career, I wasn't the same pitcher 10 years in that I was year one, and I wasn't the same pitcher 15 years in that I was in year 10. So you're always having to make adjustments. And I think it's the great players that do that time and time again that enable themselves to have that longevity. So having said that, yeah, I think, listen, I watched today's game and I know everybody throws hard, but I also watched today's game and realized there are an awful lot of pitches that are thrown over the heart of the plate, and they're thrown over the heart of the plate with the intent that I throw 95 to 100, my velocity is going to get me away with not throwing a ball to a corner. You still watch guys pitch today, and if they're throwing the ball on corners or they're throwing the ball in on guys' hands and they're actually executing their pitches, they're having good results. Pitches out over the plate, not so much. And I think that's true of any generation. It's just that now we're enamored by how hard guys throw, and we think, oh my God, that was a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. That guy just hit into the seats. Well, it was 100 miles an hour down the middle. And velocity doesn't bother hitters today because they've grown up with velocity. So, I think it's just a product of today's environment. But I still maintain if you go out there today as a pitcher, I don't care how hard you throw, if you stay out of the middle of the plate, you got a chance to be successful. And if you're not, then you don't. And I think that's been true in any generation.
You and that Oakland A's staff that had Mulder, Hudson, and Zito. In my mind, I'm thinking those are the last, you with John and Greg, are the last great trio of starting pitchers on the same staff at the same time. We've seen great duos, but I don't know if we've seen great trios. When you were in that run and the Braves were such a special team winning division title after division title, and they were always around it, were you able to enjoy it? Like really sort of enjoy what you guys were doing? Or you saw in that moment that the gravity of it all is kind of lost on you?
I would, I enjoyed it. I think we all enjoyed it because, listen, let's face it, you're playing on a team that's good, and you have a chance to win every year, and you're winning games all the time. So that's
Yeah,
fun.
but
It's always
do you
fun.
take it for granted that you're just going to go out
No,
there? No, okay.
no, I don't think we did. But like I said, we enjoyed it. But I think it's harder. It's hard to really grasp the magnitude of it when you're in the middle of it. I think you can enjoy it, you can appreciate a little bit of it, because you're being asked about it a lot. I mean, look, we had a lot of conversations and interviews that surrounded us as a trio and the great trios of the game or the great pitching staffs of the game, and so we were always in those conversations. So yeah, you're doing something good, but I don't know that as a player you really sit back and savor it, so to speak, until you're done, because you can't. You're still in it. You're still trying to be successful. You're still in the grind. And to my point, it's not doesn't mean you don't enjoy it, but I think there's a difference between enjoying what you're going through and really then appreciating the historical importance of it, so to speak. I don't think you can do that until you're done playing because you're too worried about being in the moment and staying on top of your game and not, hey, aren't I great? Look at everything we've done. Well, you still have things you want to do.
So you pitched in a time in an era that unfortunately, and certainly by nothing of your doing, has been labeled as the steroid era, right? Right or wrong, that's kind of what it's been slapped, that moniker has been slapped on it. And so given the pitchers like you and others who were so successful, do you think as a result, the fact that you pitched against all these guys who allegedly, some proven, some not, were very successful because of steroids, and the fact that you did as well as you did, do you think that makes your accomplishments stand out a little bit more? Like we stood up to these guys and we got them out.
I think I should be grandfathered 20 more wins for having to go through that.
Does it come with back pay or reparations or anything?
Yeah, right. It's a good question, and it's this question that's been asked a lot, in different ways, shapes, and forms. And I think my standard answer is, we obviously we knew something was going on, and I'll be the first to admit I was a little naive to the steroid thing. Um, I think it was at that point in time there was still you could still make an argument for some of the new ballparks that were being built, like Camden Yards, that were bandboxes.
Yep.
We had a couple of juice ball eras in there, and I don't care what anybody says, we did. So those things were going on.
Did the ball feel different in your hand, Tom?
Oh my God. I mean, you would get a baseball that, a typical baseball had some seams on it. You could rub it up and you could stick your fingernail in the leather and there'd be a little bit of an indentation. There'd be some years you get a baseball, there was no seams. You try to put your fingernail in it, it wouldn't do anything. It felt like a golf ball. And it's like, my God, I don't throw this away. Give me something else. But you could see, balls had different reactions off of bats and all that stuff. And again, that might have been steroids too, but I think inevitably it got to the point where you start to look around and guys' bodies are changing and all of a sudden, you're looking at a lineup and guys that are hitting seventh and eighth are taking you deep to the opposite field. And it's like, well, wait a minute, like when I got to the big leagues, I could count 5 guys in the National League that could do that. Now it's like 7 guys in a lineup can do it. So then it kind of gets to the point where you're like, all right, something's going on. But I think, it was just a situation for us where it was like, well, what are you going to do about it? You can't complain about it. You can't say, hey, this isn't fair. I'm taking my glove and I'm going home. You got to try to find a way to be successful, and I think that's all we focused on was just continuing to get better or continuing to try to add some wrinkles to what we were doing, and stay ahead of the curve, so to speak. It just, I think more times than not, the curve you're trying to stay ahead of is the reports or the scouting reports or the tendencies that people have on you as a player and a pitcher, and you're trying to stay ahead of that. Whereas in this case, I think that the curve we were trying to stay ahead of was the physical side of things, which was a little bit different. But to my point earlier, it just made it that much more important. You better stay out of the middle of the plate because those boys hit that one a long way.
I think it was Nolan Ryan who told Roger Clemens that the game will tell you when it is time to retire. I think Roger was kicking it around and Nolan kind of talked him out of it. Do you recall that moment when the game said it's time?
Yes and no. I mean, look, I had a point in my career earlier. I don't know when it was. It might have, maybe been 96 or somewhere, 97, more of those years I struggled, was having a tough time. And I remember talking to Don Sutton and asking him similar question. Asking him about, when did you realize that maybe you weren't that good anymore, or maybe you needed to make some changes or whatever. And I remember having a conversation with him, particularly around maybe adding a curveball and doing some stuff like that. And we talked. And at the end of the conversation, he looked at me and he said, "Listen, you're nowhere near that. So just, kind of get out of your little funk that you're in, keep working hard. You got a long way to go in your career." And I was like, wow, okay. And I took that to heart. But I think as you get older, you start to realize that things change a little bit. And for me, it wasn't like, oh my God, I've lost 4 or 5 miles an hour on my fastball, because I was never a velocity guy. I think for me, it was more about that consistency and command got a little bit harder. That consistency and movement, feel, whatever on my changeup got a little bit harder. The in between starts, getting back out there required more and more work. So, I mean, I think that's the stuff that I started to notice. And it wasn't, it wasn't nearly as often. I won't say easy, but it wasn't nearly as often that I felt like I went out there and I had my A game as maybe it was 4 or 5 years prior. It didn't mean I still couldn't pitch and still couldn't be successful. It was just a little bit harder day in and day out, or start in and start out, to go out there and feel like I had my A game.
Okay, Tom, last question. I'll let you go. I like to ask guys this. Who was the Major League Baseball hitter who was not a Hall of Famer, maybe not even an All-Star, who just gave you fits? For
Mike
whatever
Redmond.
reason, guy had
Mike Redmond. Mike Redmond of the Florida Marlins wore me up. I say it all the time. It's not true, obviously, but I jokingly say it, that he was sending a limo to pick me up when I was pitching, because he was getting 4 hits that night. I mean, it was just uncanny. And we all have them, right? Everybody has one, and it's usually not the guy you think. I look back at Smoltzy, and it was John Cangelosi wore Smoltzy out. So, it's not always the big name Hall of Fame hitters. I mean, those guys obviously do their damage too, but it seems more times than not, it's a little bit of an obscure guy that just has god awful numbers against you. And Mike Redmond was the guy for me. So, I see him from time to time, and he thanks me for keeping him in the big league. So it's all good.
Tom, thank you very much for your time today. I wish you the very best of luck in the golf tournament coming up. Stay healthy, and thank you very much for everything. I appreciate it.
All right. I enjoyed doing it. Have a good day.
You too.